Let's do another video update for the day. And I've got a lot of interesting stories to talk about. So let's jump right into it. And the first story I want to talk about is Liz Truss and some statements that she made with regards to weapons and Ukraine and NATO. And it's really interesting because if you ask me, it looks like the MIC, the military-industrial complex, is going to make a killing on this Ukraine thing. I mean a killing. So Liz Truss came out with some statements, and I'm going to grab a seat here because I'm going to need to read many quotes in this episode today. And Liz Truss said that they need to provide Ukraine with more modern types of weapons. And they need Europe, NATO countries, Europe, they need to get rid of all their old Soviet-style weapons, and they need to get modern weapons, not only for the NATO member countries, but also for Ukraine. So this is going to be really, really good business for the military-industrial complex. I mean, really good business, and I'm sure it's going to be good business for many of the politicians who have good relationships. Let's leave it like that. Good relationships with the military-industrial complex. I'm certain of that. So Liz Truss said this. Let me get her quote real quick. Let me pull it up. Liz Truss, the foreign secretary of the UK, she was the one that went to Moscow and was very embarrassed by Lavrov. I mean, she made a fool of herself. She was also the one that made the statement about mixing up the Baltic Sea and the Black Sea. So, you know, whatever she says, take it with a grain of salt, I guess, because she doesn't seem to be too much in the know. She doesn't seem very knowledgeable on things. But anyway, here's her statement. She said that NATO will send heavier weapons to Ukraine. They're going to replace the country's Soviet-era gear with more modern equipment. She also was speaking to reporters, and she confirmed that the U.S.-led bloc had agreed to ship powerful armaments to Kiev as it resists Russia's outgoing attack. Quote, there was support for countries to supply new and heavier equipment to Ukraine so that they can respond to these new threats from Russia. And we agreed, as NATO, to help Ukrainian forces move from their Soviet-era equipment to NATO standard equipment on a bilateral basis. So she says bilateral basis. In a video I did about 4 days ago, I mentioned how Cyprus was being pressured by Nuland, who made a trip to Cyprus to give up their Russian-made Soviet-era weapons, give them to Ukraine, and then the U.S. would happily provide Cyprus with American-made weapons and lock them into the American system. And I found out the other day that the defense ministry in Cyprus said they're not going to go through with it. They're trying to figure out a way to get out of Nuland's trap, but. And I'm sure it has to do with Elensky's speech that he gave to Cyprus as well. And I'll get to that in a bit. But I think the plan is this. All the NATO countries are going to basically empty out whatever inventory they have of older style weapons. The Eastern European countries that have Russian or Soviet era weapons, they're going to empty those out. They're going to dump them in Ukraine. And then they're going to purchase NATO, American weapons, and they're going to get further locked into the American military-industrial complex system. It's kind of like when you get locked into like Windows or Apple or something like that, You buy a MacBook, then you buy an iPhone and an iPad, and you're locked into the ecosystem. Apple calls it the halo effect. It's called the halo effect. And what they do is they look to get you with one of their hardware items, so then they can lock you into other hardware and other software, and that's how they make big sales. It's the same thing with the military-industrial complex, but in this case, they're just going to tell NATO countries to just dump everything they have into Ukraine, into Western Ukraine probably. It'll either get shot up by the Russians, it'll either hit the black market, some weapons will sneak through, and maybe make it to the front lines. Maybe others will just kind of sit there in the west of Ukraine and they'll be used by the Banderites, as they call them. And I'm sure a lot of weapons are just going to be, funneled all over the Middle East and Europe to do all kinds of nasty things. But the main point here, if you go off of Liz Truss's statement, is that NATO countries are going to restock. And then Ukraine eventually, she's saying eventually Ukraine is also going to get all the new shiny modern US weapons. So that's Liz Truss's statement. And let's talk about Elensky for a bit. I mentioned how Elensky spoke in Greece and then in Cyprus. His world tour took him to Greece, Cyprus. He was in Finland the other day, and I heard it was a good show. The Finnish parliament was very happy with the show that he gave. But he didn't give a good show in Greece, and he didn't give a good show in Cyprus. A lot of people were upset in Greece because he brought a special guest performer, an NAZI Azov guy. And even today, the Greek media is talking about it, and they're very, very pissed off. And Mitsotakis, the prime minister of Greece, had a lot of explaining to do. He tried to whitewash it and say, oh, well, nothing like this happened, and poor Elensky, and European solidarity, and EU solidarity, and all kinds of stuff like that. But the Greek people, they weren't buying it. And I've actually seen some recent polls in Greece where 70% of the Greeks are like, no more weapons to Ukraine, because Greece shipped a lot of weapons off to Ukraine. They said, no more weapons to Ukraine, enough of this nonsense. Elensky's a clown. That was pretty much the poll. Not the clown part, but you got the gist of it. The Greeks are furious about what took place in the parliament. And the Cypriots are furious because Elensky gave his performance, and during his performance, he didn't talk about the Turkish invasion in Cyprus, which would have seemed like a natural fit. But he didn't talk about it. And President Anastasiadis of Cyprus was pissed off, and he laid into Elensky in comments after Elensky's performance. He was very, very upset. The parliament speaker, Anita Dimitriou, is also very upset. As a matter of fact, after Elensky's show ended, the speaker of parliament, Anita Dimitriou, gave a speech after the performance was over, and she talked about how Elensky didn't mention the Turkish invasion in Cyprus. And it was funny because as she was speaking and talking about the Turkish invasion in Cyprus, Elensky, who was still on video, decided to shut off his video feed. Just like that. He just turned it off and the show was over. It was very insulting to the Cypriot people and to the Cypriot parliament. And now you're getting some of that fallout because you have a news publication, a big news publication called PhileNews, and their website called PhileNews came out with a little R&D, a little research on Elensky and some of his finances, especially his finances that are sitting offshore in Cypriot companies. And boy, did they find out a lot about Elensky. PhileNews prefaces their article. They do mention in their article that just because Elensky has a lot of business activity in Cyprus, it doesn't mean he's being investigated for anything or those business dealings are illegal in any way. So what I'm going to read you from the PhileNews research, they did some good journalism here, does not mean in any way that Elensky is up to no good in Cyprus. He's not being investigated for anything. All they did is they just went into some of his finances on the island of Cyprus, and they just did some digging, and they found out that the clown puppet actor is one wealthy clown puppet actor. That's for sure. And I'm reading to you straight from PhileNews. I'll put a link to this article down below. This is not me. This is a very big, respected news outlet in Cyprus. Think of it like the Washington Post in Cyprus. And I believe that their ideology is center-left. Cypriots, correct me if I'm wrong. Is PhileNews a center-left publication? I believe it is, but I may be wrong there. Anyway, let's get to some of what they found out about Elensky. And it's not hard to find out this stuff, to be honest. You can just go to company registrars and some very basic legwork, an afternoon of legwork, and you can pretty much find out where Elensky has his money and his business dealings in Cyprus. They do talk about the Pandora Papers, and the article's in Greek, so I'll give you guys very rough translations of this. And as I said, I'll leave a link to the article down below. You can put it in Google Translate and get an idea as to what Elensky has going on in Cyprus. They do talk about the Pandora Papers. They say that his name appears in the Pandora Papers, which were published on October 3rd, 2021, in the list of political leaders who are said to have assets of great value in tax havens. So Elensky features in that list. They say from the documents collected and published by the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, the ICIG, it appears that Elensky and his associates created a network of offshore companies in the period between 2012 and 2017, of which a lot of money was channeled to the British Virgin Islands, Belize, Cyprus, and elsewhere. A company, in fact, was transferred to a friend of the current president of Ukraine on the eve of the election, specifically a month before Elensky won in 2019. The former actor, who became a politician, sold his stake in a company called Maltex to Sergei Sefer, a close friend and associate. PhileNews says that in another part of their investigation, they found that in the Pandora Papers, there were a lot of companies related to Cyprus, connected to Cyprus. The German newspaper Süddeutsche Zeitung talks about Cypriot offshore companies of the current president of Ukraine, Elensky, and the former oligarch Kolomoisky. Kolomoisky is considered a supporter of Zeleensky. He's accused with embezzling, Kolomoisky is accused with embezzling 5 billion euros from the Ukrainian bank Privat Bank, which, by the way, also has branches in Cyprus as well. I'm not sure if those branches have closed, but last time I was in Cyprus, there was a Privat Bank in Nicosia. And Kolomoisky was accused of embezzling, and I stress the word accused of embezzling, 5 billion euros from Privat Bank, of which Kolomoisky was a co-owner. Then head of the Ukrainian Central Bank, the then head of the Ukrainian Central Bank, had spoken about Kolomoisky, saying it was, and I quote, the biggest financial fraud of the 21st century. The U.S. State Department, once again, this is according to PhileNews. Everything I'm reading to you guys is according to PhileNews, not me. The U.S. State Department says that, the U.S. State Department has imposed sanctions on Kolomoisky, while lawsuits are pending against him in Great Britain, Cyprus, Israel, and the USA. I did not know that. I did not know that there are various lawsuits pending against Kolomoisky, as well as sanctions by the U.S. State Department. That's interesting. According to a Munich newspaper, wow, a lot of German media was doing their research on Kolomoisky and Elensky. Where are those German journalists today? Where are they? Munich newspaper said that in 2019, a Ukrainian MP had claimed that Zeleensky also benefited from fraud. It is said that $41 million had been transferred from Privat Bank to 16 companies in Cyprus, Panama, Belize, and the Seychelles. Pandora paper figures show that 10 of the 16 companies belong to Kolomoisky and his entourage, including his former show producer and current secretary Sergei Sefer, as well as his childhood friend Ivan Balkanov and the current director of Secret Services in Ukraine. According to the information, two of the offshore companies, the Cypriot company called Candlewood Limited and the Belize-based SHSN Limited, have acquired a total of 3 properties in London worth several million pounds. PhileNews also says that Elensky's wife, Olena, also has activity in Cyprus. It says that before being elected to the presidency, Elensky declared some of his assets, car, real estate, and 3 of his offshore companies. The The company's names are one, Film Heritage, which he co-owned with his wife Olena, and a company called Kvartal 95, Writer, Kvartal 95, which is based in Belize. However, data from the Pandora Papers show other offshore assets, which Elensky allegedly did not disclose. Film Heritage, this company called Film Heritage, had a 25% stake in Davegra, a Cypriot holding company. Davegra, in turn, owns Maltex Municipal Corp, a previously unknown entity registered in the tax havens of the Virgin Islands. Elensky and the Sefer brothers and Yakovlev, another guy named Yakovlev, owned a 25% stake in Maltex. On March 13th, 2019, 2 weeks before the first round of the presidential elections in Ukraine, I believe it says that Elensky sold the stake in Maltex. So that's a bit of this article. Good on PhileNews. That's how journalism is done. And once again, this is not me. I'm not making any claims here, nor is PhileNews. They're just going through company registrars and various publications, most of which were in Germany, and they're just kind of laying it out as to the wealth that Elensky has obtained, and he has, in a very, very complicated web of companies all over the place. Quite a complicated network of companies. And usually when you go through the trouble of creating so many companies in so many offshore jurisdictions, well, you know, do I need to say it? I don't need to say it. I think everyone gets the idea. It's interesting that PhileNews ran this once again. I think it shows that the Cypriot people and various Cypriot politicians and publications are pissed off with Elensky's performance he gave the other day. Very pissed off, and they're letting him know. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a lot of business interests in Cyprus as well that are sending a message to the current government with regard to all the sanctions against Russia and how they're going to lose a lot of money. I'm sure a lot of accounting firms, law firms that are tied into Russian businesses, of which there are a lot of in Cyprus, as well as the tourist industry and the property industry. I bet you they are furious with the fact that President Anastasiadis and his government are going along with the EU sanctions, and they are going to hurt the Cypriot economy in a big, big way. Anyway, let's wrap up this video and get to Nicolas Maduro, the president of Venezuela. He has broken his silence, and he has talked about what's going on with Russia and the sanctions. Of course, Venezuela has also been sanctioned heavily by the collective West, and Maduro said this. He said that he denounces the sanctions. He says that the collective West wants to start a big war with Moscow, and he said this, quote, "They are lining up economically, politically, and diplomatically in the West for a big war against Russia. From Venezuela, we denounce it." This is what Maduro said in a televised speech on Friday. He said they want a war. This is an interesting comment. They want a war to dismember Russia, destroy it in pieces, and end the hope of a multipolar world where we can all live. Big statements from the Venezuelan leader who has undergone regime change. They tried to, the U.S. tried to create this puppet Guaido leader to name him as the legitimate president of Venezuela, Juan Guaido. And then the Biden administration actually went to Venezuela and begged them to give them oil after Biden placed sanctions on Russia. So Maduro now is coming out and speaking, and boy, those were some powerful words from Nicolas Maduro. And he's right. He understands. They want regime change, and they want to, in his words, dismember Russia and destroy the dreams of a multipolar world, a fair world order, as Foreign Minister Lavrov of Russia and the Foreign Minister Wang Yi of China described it, a fair world order. Anyway, that's the video, guys. TheDuran.locals.com. Take care.